I was working with a coach at one of my most challenging points through lockdown. And I was obviously talking badly about myself on one of the calls. And she said, I want you to go and sit in front of a mirror. And I want you to see the person in the mirror, not as you, but as somebody else. And I want you to think of all the things that person's done and all the mountains they've climbed and everything they're facing. And I want you to talk to them how you would talk to that person as if it's not you. And that's really emotional and really makes you realise how you should be talking to yourself.
I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. Super excited to welcome Thea Brook to the show. Finally, we've been planning this for a little while. Thea is one of those people who, every time I see a post on LinkedIn, I'm like, founders need to see this. And you also have such an incredible story yourself. You've been through the highs and the lows. You've done some really hard things in entrepreneurship. So Thea has a background in finance before becoming an entrepreneur herself, starting with restaurants and then going into ready meals, which is a really hard space to play in. And then taking that knowledge and now playing it back with startups. You kind of started doing that in more of a CFO role, fractional CFO, and then recently moving to actually broader business advice, encompassing that finance piece, which I think is really good for founders, because often my worry is things end up a little bit disjointed. So it's really lovely, I think, when you find someone who can help on the finances. And I appreciate lots of CFOs do have this in their wheelhouse, but being able to step back and look at it from that full sway. The other things I think I really want to touch on today that you do exceptionally are helping founders think about their own mental health and journey within it. And we know how important that is. And also about personal founder brand and doing that in a way that feels authentic and not forced, but actually also isn't leaving a ton of value on the table because you're not talking about yourself and what you're doing.
Yeah.
So much to unpack. So let's start from the beginning. Obviously working in finance, tell us a little bit about that. And then also when entrepreneurship became a path, and was it something you always thought you'd do? Was it something that was a bit of a surprise? How did it come about?
So I have a really odd combination in my background. It would be really nice and clear cut if I said I was in finance and then I moved into entrepreneurship. But actually, I first started, believe it or not, training as a dancer and a dance teacher. So
I can't believe that. You've got some grace about you.
people meet me in my finance capacity and then they hear about this creative side and they're all very confused because of the combination. I actually opened a dance school when I was 20. So
we have spoken about this before. So I told you there'd be so much I've forgotten because you've got one of those stories like, and this, so many things. Sometimes I'm talking to people and they're like, are you 75? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you can't see her, Thea does not look 75.
So yes, I had my first business when I was 20. So always really went off down that route. And I was one of those people who, when I was 6, if there was anything my parents would offer out as a job to earn some money, I wouldn't just be doing it. I'd be figuring out how I can systemize it and do it more efficiently and earn more. But all my siblings would just be like, do it for 5 minutes and then go watch TV. No. So I think I always had that entrepreneurial side. And then I really accidentally ended up in finance through just not knowing what I wanted to do and doing admin and getting involved in some finance and being good at it. And then that took me down one career path. And then came back round to entrepreneurship, partly because in my finance side of my career, ended up working with startups. So that was amazing. You're just getting around that energy and really feeling like, oh, this fits. Something feels like it's found its way back home to me. And then really accidentally opened a restaurant alongside having my finance role. When I had the 2 restaurants, I was still working, leading finance for Zopa Bank.
Because restaurants are notoriously very low energy side hustles, right?
Really low. You just basically just let them run themselves.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
So what made you take the leap to start a restaurant? What was the catalyst? How did you get started while doing something else full time?
So it genuinely did start almost accidentally, very slow creep. My husband was opening a recording studio. And at the front of the recording studio, there was a space that was going to be reception. And my business brain kicked into play. I think my finance, make sure everything is efficient. Brain
love that
to play. And I said, well, you're going to pay somebody to sit on reception in this empty room all day long, nothing happening. So let's make it a coffee shop instead. Because at least that way it can be a reception, but it can also have a money-making function to it.
Nice.
So it started as this little coffee shop to be at the front of a recording studio.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started through the recording studio putting on live music events that needed a bar license every time we ran one. And then we were doing so many, the council said, actually, you guys should just get a bar license.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, oh, that's something you can do.
Yeah.
Are we allowed?
Yeah.
So then we applied, got a bar license, turned it into a bar and a coffee shop. And then that was really picking up. We thought, actually, there was space on the next floor up.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, well, let's just renovate that and make that a restaurant. We ended up with a pop-up cinema. So we did live events, restaurant, bar, all the things.
Yeah.
And that about 1.5, 2 years in became plant-based.
Mm-hmm.
We had changed our diets, didn't open that way. And then after a while, we felt like it was very strange that we were buying all this food in because we'd done it for sustainability reasons and it just didn't fit anymore. So we went plant-based. I thought we might kill the business. Actually, it doubled it overnight. It was amazing. So really got into that side, and it was just as people were starting to talk more about plant-based food. You still couldn't buy vegan cheese or vegan meats or anything like that.
What year is this?
2016.
Mm-hmm.
So really started to get into that, really started to see how people were coming in and their minds were being blown at what they could eat plant-based. We didn't push it. We wouldn't really advocate why we were plant-based or that people should come and eat with us that way. We were just more about properly homemade food, well-sourced ingredients, locally sourced, all that kind of thing. So people would just come anyway because they liked that ethos. And then we'd have these groups of people come in where one person was clearly vegan and had made all their friends come and they were all a bit disgruntled. And then people would be stopping us halfway through the meal and saying, what is this? This is amazing. If I knew how to make this, I'd eat more of this way. So really started to think, okay, this is something where we can really make an impact. Mm-hmm. And veganism was starting to really kick off around the Hackney area. So there was vegan market and a couple of restaurants, and that's where it was all building up. So I decided to run a test with the second restaurant effectively and say, our local community love this. They love us. We've done a lot in the area. So maybe that's why we're successful here. Let's go into the heart of where it's all happening and see what happens. Yeah. And we had been open at the Hackney site for 3 months and we won the Time Out Award for Best Restaurant in Hackney and blew my mind completely.
And are you still working in finance at this point? I have so many questions about how you're doing both because I feel like there is a big piece, and I want to keep going with the restaurant story as well, but I do want to, I guess, pause because I spend a lot of my time gently asking founders if now is really the time to quit their job or if they should actually test and prove the business a bit more. And I think there's lots of factors that go into like, when is it the right time? And I'm always a really bad example because I had to quit my job to do something new because I worked at a venture studio. So every idea I came up with legally they owned. So I couldn't stay in my job and do stuff off to the side very easily. Yeah. But for lots of people, they can. And I think we underestimate this until we don't have it. The psychological security of, and I think for some people, they need the push of not having it. But actually for lots of people, I think they don't realize how hard it is to be at your best creatively when you're financially super up against it. And so I guess were there learnings in that period about what was hardest about juggling and also how to make it easier and doable?
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I preach this a lot. You really can't underestimate when you feel like you've got that chokehold of cash and you really need the cash. You don't come up with the best answers to things and you don't come up with the best strategies and you're not clear-headed and
I really think this like hungry narrative of founders need to be hungry. Have you seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Like hunger is pretty base level. If you are hungry and eating cornflakes for every meal, like most people can't do their best.
And I think there's different ways to achieve that. And one of them I think is more around that time efficiency. Yeah. You know, I would rather be really short on time. Yeah. But know that just my bases are covered on the financial side of things. That's all you need is just to know, okay, when my bills come at the end of the month, they're paid. I have no money for luxuries, so I'm going to miss out on a load of things. But actually, when you've got that time restriction, you become so much more efficient about what can I really spend my time on, what's really going to move the needle. If you give me 7 days a week, I will ponder for...
This is true. This is true. We did a great episode with Rachel Harris, who is an accountant, and we talked about this internal charge out rate idea. So you have like a number where
if it costs you less than that, you would pay to someone to outsource it. So it's basically about valuing your time. But if you have absolutely no money, your time just becomes no value because your internal charge rate has to be so low. But actually, if you have a side hustle, suddenly you can start to say, well, I'm going to focus on the bits that I want to be really strategic about and I add the most value, and I'm going to outsource other bits.
100%. You can also really feel like you can own your decisions
Yes.
when you can pay for them yourself. So not feeling like you need to very quickly go and get any kind of debt or thinking that you need to raise somebody else's money straight away. You have complete control of that. And that as well accentuates that creativity that's coming from you.
And because we see so much from founders who are fundraising because they need to be able to pay themselves a salary. And the problem is, for investors, that's not the most compelling reason to invest, right? They normally want it to be because you need the money to meet the demand that you've generated already, or realize this incredible technical innovation that you've really proven a need for. But yeah, you wanting to pay yourself, while some investors get the psychological need for that and don't see it as unimportant as the predominant reason to raise, is not normally seen as the right one. So I think founders often fall into that trap where they've then been working on it 2 years without a salary because in some ways they quit too early.
100%. I actually even think, so when I left the finance role, it was when we were transitioning the business or additionally launching the product side of the business.
Yeah.
And I even think I stopped too soon.
Interesting.
Then. And after going through probably that first year or so, with hindsight, I would have done more of what we did in that first year.
Interesting.
Before raising and going into it full time.
So we left the story. You've just opened your second restaurant in Hackney. Where does it go from there?
So then about 9-10 months into that, after winning that award, I really started to think, okay, we're doing something here. Veganism is really starting to have its day. But it was really a world where there was the yoga, kale end of the spectrum, and then there was dirty fried burgers, and nobody was really doing anything in the middle. And that's where we were seeing the real bridge and the accessibility for people to understand. So I thought, right, we're doing something here. I want to move into it full time. So I originally put together a whole plan for the business and a pitch deck and everything. Decided, I need to raise to really move into it full time for growing a restaurant chain.
Yeah.
And I spent about 4 months really deep into that whilst running the 2 restaurants and doing the financial. And then I just had an epiphany one evening, having a glass of wine, that I really didn't want to run restaurants.
And just a quick note on that as well, and I'll come back to the lightning bolt, but I think one of the challenges for founders who are kind of in these spaces that aren't actually tech spaces is that you're often given exactly the same advice as like tech founders on raising, and actually investors need very different things to be true, or they might be different kinds of investors to those who are investing in like other startups.
And it was really through that process that the more I looked at it, I think it's something like you have to get to about 25 sites for a restaurant business to make sense. It's a highly capital intensive, low margin area. Plus it's 24/7. You're dealing with fire and food that can hurt people and drunk customers. There's so many things about it. I just remember the more I built out this plan, I thought, no, I don't want to do this.
And actually it's a really good point, because I guess you've probably heard this a lot recently from founders. There is often this resistance to like planning, particularly financial modeling, because no one wants to do it. So that's the one they're most resistant to, when it is all assumptions. But I'm a big fan because I am a massive convert. I used to think the same thing, right? It's all assumptions, what such a waste of all of our time. But actually, I'm a huge fan of going through that mental exercise for you, if not investors, because I do think, to your point, suddenly you start to see, hang on, this needs to reach such a scale to make sense. Hang on, what would my role then be? Oh, wait, I'm doing none of the things I like? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I don't want to do that. Is there a way this works with me doing what I like? Not really. Okay, interesting. So I need a different approach to scaling, or I need to not scale as hard. But then if I don't scale as hard, no one will fund it. So, okay, how am I going to fund it that's not investment? And I think it really starts to force you into these questions. And so you're having a glass of wine, having had all of this kind of ticking through your head as you've been doing this plan, and the epiphany was you don't want to do restaurants. Yeah. Was the ready meal idea then immediate? What
No,
happened?
so actually, even when we launched the business, the ready meal idea wasn't quite the ready meal idea when we
Okay.
launched that new business for that side of things. What I knew was that we were really on something in terms of our approach to plant-based food and how it was helping shift people's perceptions. It was a really educational product without having to shout. And so I thought, right, we've got the strong brand, we've got all this IP around the recipes. What else can we do in the space? So what it actually started as, we knew it was going to be using that IP and the brand to launch into the space. But the first year, the focus was really on serving the food service industry.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's where we were seeing the change.
Yeah.
That people were in that mood to go out for
Yeah.
dinner and they're all having fun and they're all together and they're talking. And actually in that environment,
Yeah.
if you have something that really catches you off guard, then it really starts to spread.
So the idea was this to existing restaurants who wanted to add a vegan option. Like, what is the target audience and why?
Yeah, so all restaurants were starting to add vegan options, but they were all generally a burger.
Yeah.
And that's because they couldn't hire chefs that
Yeah.
knew what they were doing, or someone would get an amazing chef and launch a great menu, but as soon as that chef left,
Yes.
they couldn't carry it on anymore. So what we wanted to do is take our understanding of both running that kind of business,
Yeah.
so what you need to happen in the kitchen for it to be viable, and what's making customers happy on the other side, and effectively just plug that in
Interesting. Okay.
to
So
restaurants.
thinking about the ops side of it, how do you actually make it run and how do you make it profitable, as well as we have a tasty thing. And I think important for founders, I think, to think about both sides of that when you're thinking about what can we take from what we already do and actually scale into a different revenue stream.
Yeah, and really thinking about who are you selling to and what do they need, right? Because for us, Pos who we were selling to was going to be that end consumer who was going to have to choose it off a menu and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But really, the people we had to convince were the restaurants who were not used to doing things this way or bringing in this kind of menu. So you've really got to have your mind on that piece of the puzzle.
And so what did you learn from selling to those restaurants?
Well, we didn't get as far as selling to them
Okay.
because this was early 2019 when we launched.
No, it's coming. It's like I feel like every episode is, and then it was 2020. Oh, God. I feel so sorry for everyone who went through this. Yeah, this is brutal. Okay, yeah. 2020.
Yeah, so we were due to launch with people like the restaurant group and even with the spoons and some really interesting customers. Then the whole hospitality sector shut down. So we didn't.
Yeah.
Luckily, in the early days, we had also done some trade shows just to meet people and to get ourselves out there. And one of the things that happened through one of those trade shows is that we had launched a small range with Co-op. So we'd already got our foot in the door.
How did that happen though? So when you said you were doing trade shows, this is for the ready meal product. How does this bit work?
So we were really just introducing the meals as installations. But when I say we did a trade show, we have a 2x1 meter tiny little space so we can barely stand, just to get out talking to people. You get food service buyers come to those trade shows as well as retail. But
you had samples there and we're just getting people to try the food.
Yeah.
Interesting. We did a session actually for Virgin Startups this week with a food and beverage buyer, and his biggest piece of advice was you've got to get them to try the food, and then if they love the food and they think this is really different in the market, to your point, having everything else ready to go isn't actually as important as you sometimes think.
100%. In that industry, yes, sometimes somebody wants you to turn something around quite quickly, and actually that was what happened with us with Co-op. But generally, you start those conversations and it can actually take years for it to translate into being on shelf somewhere. So you've often got that time.
So Co-op say, we like this, we want to put it in stores. What is then the process? Do you have to brand it? Where are you in that journey when they say yes?
We had a rough idea of how to package it anyway, because when we first wanted to transition into producing the meals, because it's very different to produce them on scale to us in a restaurant kitchen, right? So we knew we were already going through that process for the work with the restaurants. And we had been sending them out to, we had a group of 100 customers who were our old restaurant customers who are effectively out, I think we called it the test kitchen. And we'd set that up right from the beginning of this side of the business. So we would just ship them out meals as we were like, okay, so you loved our chicken chasseur or something that we'd do at the restaurant. We've made it on scale we're going to send you a portion to check that it still feels like it's as good as it would have been
Yeah.
when we were making it in the
Nice.
restaurant. So we already knew really how to create the meals and get them into that sort of packaging. Although I think we went through 4 different product form and packaging changes through the course of that few years, which is very normal. Everybody does that. And it was more like, who's going to produce? That was the challenge. Who's going to produce them? And the amount of food founders I speak to that just haven't really realised that that's going to be the biggest sticking point for them. They think, oh, getting on shelf is going to be difficult, or sourcing ingredients. Genuinely, who will make your product at the scale, at the point you're at?
Yes, and that's a really tricky thing as well. What I see with a lot of founders, curious on your take on this, is you end up going to places where you can do it at a smaller scale, like Mission Kitchen, which is really cool space for founders to create food and beverage businesses. But then they really struggle with the switching point to scale. What would be your advice, having been through that process? Or what would you say, actually, you just need to go and look at these things, even if it's not advice? What are the things that might catch them out?
I think everybody understanding that it's messy. Manufacturing is really tricky. It was generally, if you're coming out with something, there's something new about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that newness of either product form or ingredients or whatever it might be that you have to try and find somebody who's willing to do it for you. And the world of manufacturing, they're like the worst companies at marketing themselves ever. So trying to find them is incredibly difficult. It's always through somebody who introduced you to somebody who introduced you to somebody that you eventually find the manufacturing
that a lot.
You end up with. You just have to go after it and do your best and not think, oh, we're not finding somebody, so it's game over. Everybody goes through exactly the same thing.
Would a good way to find manufacturers be to look at products you like the form of and you look at where they're manufacturing?
Potentially. There's quite often not obvious who's manufacturing them. Again, it's quite well hidden. There's some amazing shows that I know people who've got great partners in manufacturing through. There's one in Amsterdam every year, for example. So those are brilliant. Just speaking to food development companies, they usually have a good understanding of who's out there, and really not just the form that they'll do, but at what point in your production. Our journey with manufacturing is really interesting. We started off ourselves because we couldn't find anybody who would do it. So we actually decided to build out our own manufacturing site. I think you have to really think about your founder fit when you're approaching these things.
Explain that to people who are like, oh, founder fit's a new term to me.
It's not just your capability. So your capability, your experience, all that kind of thing, but also what's your network, what's your resources, what's all the things you've got at your disposal. And the thing that you're thinking about doing, that you're either the type of company you're going to run or how you're going to approach it, how much of that can you just do already because you've got the experience or you've got the resources or all those kind of things versus how much you're going to need to go and lean on other people and find other people.
And I guess also on that leaning on other people and finding other people, if you've already got a really strong network that you know you can lean on, that is part of founder fit, because
100%.
You're not wasting time building relationships. Negotiation is a lot easier and quicker, and you're not having to build trust both sides. And some really critical points where if the trust is broken, and I've heard some horror stories, you're really in trouble.
Yeah, 100%. And the other side of it is, what's your energy levels? What's your desire of how you work? All those kind of things. You know, when we were thinking about whether we manufacture or not, I'd run multiple restaurants whilst also leading finance, juggling all those things at the same time. So I knew that, one, I could fit out a physical space designed for food production. It's different to a restaurant, of course, but there's a lot of it in there. I knew how to run teams in that world. I knew what we needed to do from a health and safety perspective. So there was a lot in
You've
it.
done a lot of learning curve.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So when people say to me, oh, you did your own manufacturing, do you think we should? I'm like, well, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to look at it on its own.
Yeah.
With what's happening with you guys. And also, can you really not do what you want to do with somebody else? Because at the end of the day, if you can, you should.
And this is what I keep coming back to, is the opportunity cost. I think founders are really bad at valuing their time and their energy.
And focus.
Exactly.
Even just on this new business, we were running 2 businesses when we launched, because there's the side of the business where you're building a brand and getting out to, you know, doing the sales and all that kind of thing, which some brands just focus on. But we were running a manufacturing site at the same time, which is in itself its own business.
Yeah. And so with co-op, you go through this process of testing with your test kitchen, working out the kind of packaging and side of things, and then you're luckily in stores when COVID hits.
Yes.
Okay, so the restaurant, presumably your own restaurants overnight, nightmare.
Yeah.
All of these potential deals with service providers to get into their restaurants with your meals, nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
What happens?
To an extent, everything stopped, to be honest, because even though we were in co-op, retailers, it took the wind out of their sails as well in terms of what's going on, how do we handle this?
Yeah, they were just focused on like loo roll.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everything stopped to an extent. And then retail probably didn't pick back up again for about 6 months, I'd say. So in the meantime, we started thinking, okay, well, people need food.
Mm-hmm.
We make food. Let's send people food.
Yeah.
So we just went into D2C e-com mode, especially as we had the product now in a D2C form effectively. So it was starting to figure out, okay, because we froze our products, so we'd make the food and freeze it. Like, how do you get frozen meals to people and it's still frozen? And we need to set up the website.
Which is like a nightmare that people like all plants have spent so much money trying to solve.
Millions, yes. I mean, it was great that they were already around because it showed us that people are already aware of this.
Yeah.
I don't think Cook were doing home delivery before lockdown. I think lockdown was when they launched theirs as well.
I think you might be right.
So it was very early as a concept generally, but we'd seen that people were doing it and we had customers who needed to be fed. So we just went into that world.
Other than, global pandemic, I feel like none of us have processed that. But what were the hardest parts of doing a direct-to-consumer play? You'd obviously already in some ways been building community with consumers in restaurant, but it is different, right, to do it e-commerce versus a physical space. What were some of the biggest things that surprised you about trying to do a direct-to-consumer play that until you'd done it, you didn't really clock?
Almost everything.
So honest. I love it. This is why I want you. I love the honesty.
That period, given what we've said already about how many businesses running at the same time, complexity, all that kind of stuff, that period was the hardest period of business building that I had ever experienced and really shocked me, I think. I spent so much of the first 9 or 10 months trying to get our e-commerce off the ground, thinking, I'm a smart person and I've tackled so many different challenges and why this is not working? Why is this not working? You can get logistics sorted out, but the whole world of online marketing is so different to anything I'd done before in terms of business building, whether it's my very early days dance school or the restaurant business or anything like that. You had a physical presence, you had a local presence. You didn't even need to be online at all, really, to get that right and spread word of mouth. And you're very different in terms of marketing approach. You're not even the physical product in people's hands. You're just this piece of internet somewhere.
Yeah.
And trying to convey everything that you're about and how good the product is and why people should spend £50 having it delivered to their home. And it was really challenging. And I think probably the hardest thing was that I went into it thinking, okay, we know we've got product people love. We know there's a market out there for this, for sure. I just need to find the experts in digital marketing who can do the bit in the middle and connect us to all these people. And we went through, I think, 4 in total marketing agencies and about 30 grand of precious budget. And we were still 10, 11 months in at exactly the same sales we'd started at. None of them could get us off the ground.
Why do you think that was? Do you think it was the agency model where they don't have the same buy-in? It was such a new market to them they hadn't sold to before? Was it that everyone was just slightly floundering in like, where do I spend my money? What am I doing with my life? Can I go outside today?
Well, it wasn't the latter because I eventually took over the marketing.
Yeah.
I just locked myself indoors the whole of Christmas and was like, I'm figuring this out.
Yeah.
And we came out in January straight out of the gate and we grew 50% month on month.
So what did you do differently that suddenly you think drove those conversions?
I think there was a couple of things. One thing I really learned about working with agencies, and this is not true of all agencies, and always caveat that, but it's true of a lot.
Yeah.
I would describe it as, if you imagine you've got an underground pipe and you're putting water in one side and ideally water's coming out the other side, and it's not. right? The money we're pouring into marketing and we're hoping sales coming out the other end. Well, anywhere along that pipe, there could be a hole or 4, 5 holes. And what digital marketing agencies tend to do is they say, that section of the pipe is ours, and we're going to go in and see if there's any holes and work on that. For example, you've got somebody who's running Facebook ads. They maybe just focus on what does a great Facebook ad look like. But if you're sending traffic to a website that's not set up to convert, you're just bleeding all that money straight.
And by the way, I think this is actually an important point for founders, because I see this challenge all the time. You must see it all the time, where founders come to me and they go, our ads aren't working. And they go, okay, great. Should we just check that it's your ads? Can we just talk through your data? And they're like, oh, what do you mean? And I'm like, A, they don't have data visibility on that whole pipe. They don't know who's clicking off as soon as they get on the website. They don't know where they're clicking off when they get on the website. And there's some amazing tools now to do heat mapping on your website to say, what are they looking at? Where are they spending their time? When do they leave? You can record sessions. You can actually watch what they're doing and where they're clicking to. And you're like, that's not where you should be going next. Oh, interesting. You're going there. We haven't really given that any time. And that's literally the first thing you click on. Or they literally arrive on the website and immediately churn.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, agencies are bad at it, but founders are also really bad at it. I've been coaching lots of startups recently, and the thing that I guess for them is just a new framing, which totally makes sense if you've not done marketing before, but it's this idea of a funnel. You need a bigger top, and it is going to get smaller and smaller as you go down, even if you've got no leaks, right? The leaks are just going to be like, some customers maybe aren't as interested or don't have the budget right now, or the timing's wrong. And so you're going to lose people at every stage, and you need to have a big enough opening at the top, like a lead generation. But then you do need to be able to convert enough at each stage that you end up with an exciting amount of, to your analogy, water at the end.
Yeah. And really thinking about and understanding what is the process that they're going through all that time.
Exactly.
Before you're thinking in funnels, if you haven't been in marketing, you're thinking about it as a consumer, which is very one step. You're thinking, I see something, I like the look of it, and I buy it.
Which isn't how consumers actually think. We forget that when we think about our consumers buying our product, right?
Yeah.
It's Black Friday. I've had my items in my basket for 4 days. I've added, I've deleted, I've compared 5 different shops.
But not only that, you might have had it in your basket for 4 days, but you have been like dripping and building up over the last 6 months.
I've spent hours on Instagram and TikTok looking at videos, trying to find tutorials that I like, trying to find products that I like. There's been so many hours of research, people who've influenced me. Oh, okay, I saw that on another video. Okay, I liked it on all 3 videos and they're very different looks. Okay, I think it might work on me. And you're right, when we think about our customer buyer journeys, we forget all of our own experience as consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, what do we need to see and hear at that stage in terms of, I think when you start out, you start thinking about like, what's our cool, different, standout marketing message, rather than what's actually just the very basic information and language those people need at those stages. As you're building that awareness of what somebody does and you're building the trust for them, the easier that is for you to just understand it, the more you're going to latch on to a brand. It's not going to be all that fancy wording.
And marketing taglines, I don't want to undersell that they can be important and can differentiate you, but I can't think of a single product I bought because of the marketing tagline. I bought it because I had a belief in what it would do for me, right? A hope that they had sold me on, that this is going to solve this problem or make me feel joy that I hadn't even experienced before. And I think we're really bad with marketing at coming back to some of those core principles of what would we want. And we're not good at doing that without maybe some frameworks and structure that forces through those questions.
Yeah. You have to always think in 2 sides with marketing. The marketing messaging side, it can really move people. You then end up putting a brand in a certain sea, maybe with other brands or with other things you think about the world. That's the brand build side. But if you're paying for ads, you're paying for acquisition, and you just want people to understand what you do. And really, the best place you need to get that from is from your customers.
Yes,
you need to go and talk to them. I did this recently, actually. I just filmed a video about it with one of my clients. We just wanted to see if we could get their ads more effective. So we actually picked up the phone.
Yes.
Which people just don't do anymore.
Yeah, I'm scared. I'm a millennial. I'm terrified of phone calls, but I go and see people face to face. So that's somehow less scary.
But yeah, the phone is the best, always talking to people. But even just looking back through customer service emails, looking at reviews, all those kind of things, and actually figure out what are people saying about why they buy us or why they love us, and just using that back. And then other people can see that.
And also, if you don't have a product yet that has reviews, go and look at your competitors' negative reviews
Mhm.
and see what lets them down. What are the points that really stick? And how can you then actually really focus on resolving those pains? And is it for a big volume of people? Is it a few that are disgruntled and it doesn't matter?
Yeah.
But like, how are you really going to stand out and solve the problem in a different way?
Yeah, 100%. AI is so good for that.
Yes, 100%.
Now you could quickly pull 60 to 100 reviews off somebody else's site, run it through AI, and it'll tell you exactly what you should be focused on.
Yes, 100%. So you managed to transform the marketing by thinking really about it as a full system as opposed to thinking about it as isolated chunks.
Yeah, that was part of it. Part of it was just really looking at the data. We've been running ads that whole time, pretty much, and going in and really looking at, okay, what did work? And I sort of pulled it all together, made sure that what was happening when people landed on the site, that whole piece. But a lot of it was to do with just looking at what worked, launched the best of that. And I was floored that it just worked after having all these specialists look at it, and then it just flew.
Yeah. And so you said, what was the number? It suddenly went 50% increase. Was that right?
Yeah, month on month for
50% growth.
5 months before we had to curve it.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty big.
Yeah. So within about 5 months, we were at 500,000 on our store after nobody being able to get it off the ground.
What I see you focusing on with founders today, and it goes much further than F&B, right? You're working with lots of different kinds of business. There is so much in there. And I think it's been evident throughout the episode so far that you're helping ask questions. But I really wanted to dive into what are the questions that you think founders are failing to ask that are the most fundamental ones that you see time and time again, either having the biggest impact on the founder personally and or the business, which we know are not discrete at this point.
A really key one is not being critical enough in the early days and being problem-centric. I see a lot of newer founders, not even first-time founders, to be honest, always being product-centric. And it's so easy to fall into that trap because
100%.
you're so attached. There was a point when you were problem-centric, and I tried to take my founders back to that mindset, because we always start problem-centric, right? That's our why. We start fired up. Either we've experienced a problem or somebody we've seen experience a problem. But then our idea factory brains have gone 10 million steps ahead. They've started developing out this solution. They've really spent a lot of time on it. So then you're going forward with this solution that actually hasn't gone through enough testing and had enough time spent on it. So that's a big one. I'm always really trying to get people to just detach a little bit from the solution, and always saying, this is not to say you're not going to go forward with that solution.
I think, founders hear this, let's go back to the problem, and they're like, you want to get rid of everything I've ever done and thought and my beautiful idea? And I'm like, no, maybe just let's sense check a few things.
Yeah, I get everybody to try and get in the mindset that what they actually sell is magic blue ice cream. And it's so childish, but it's so obscure that it really helps to work.
Talk me through that. I'm so fascinated.
Whenever we're then trying to get back into that mindset of there's a core problem and we need to figure out really what that problem is, on what level, and who has it, and all the different ways we can approach it, not just in terms of developing the solution, but then how we position the solution, all those kind of things. If you're trying to go into that process, you're so attached to what you already know is the solution. If you can switch out for something really obscure and say, actually, what I've developed for this is magic blue ice cream. Got this amazing solution.
Yeah.
It kind of puts a bit of
I love that.
a barrier between you and your baby, so that you can focus back on the problem space again.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's actually a really good trick for founders that lots of us who teach founders do in different ways, which is if you're trying to learn a new way of doing things, and founders sometimes resist me on this in workshops, I go, okay, we're going to learn this new framework, which is going to be really helpful for your business, but we're not going to touch your business for 20 minutes. And they're like, oh, but I want it for my idea. And you're like, no, hold. I promise you'll find it easier if you've learned the tool without your idea being attached to it, because there will be bits in the process of learning the tool that will start to make you think, oh, interesting. But if you start learning it with your business in mind, you don't have that openness.
You kind of listen to 50% of it, 100%, and ignore the other.
Your brain is like, oh, yeah, my marketing strategy that I've already got designed could really use this.
Yes. So that's a big area. The other one is not understanding that it's really easy to make things really complex, and that actually what you really need to focus on is mastering simplicity and focus.
I mean, by the way, you're not preaching to the converted. I agree with this, but I'm not this.
Well,
I
but it's
overcomplicate
all
it.
it's our MO.
Yeah.
I fall into it as well, and it's something when I launched this business, I was determined that I was going to master this business. Be really ruthless with myself around it, and that I was going to center it constantly in joy and never get near having to make decisions out of stress or fear. So that's a whole nother topic. But I think the simplicity thing is, I think people don't even make the realization that it's the challenge. We get into these conversations as just this norm around, oh, I'm doing all these things and I'm spinning all these plates. Yeah. It's almost like that's the good thing and that's the badge of honor, where that's actually the easy thing. It's really easy for us as entrepreneurs to get busy and to have way too many things going on.
So true. And actually, it leads me on to a question, I guess, about how you're doing things differently now for yourself as a founder and why you're prioritizing things differently.
Yeah. Really burnt out in my last business. I knew that I was running on steam, but I didn't realize how much until I stopped, actually. We had the COVID thing, then we had all the changes with iOS 14, then we had the Ukraine war, and it was just one thing after another. So we were really just moving the business through the next firefight. And that does put you in a very different position. It's the same with lots of businesses, even if you're not going through that, or where you think the business is going is really not where it's necessarily going to go, and you're constantly working with that. But I think that I just let myself get very far down the pile through that to keep everything going, to keep all the teams going, the sites going, everything. When I came out of that business, I was so exhausted. I went away for a week just to get a bit of a break. And I had a book that I love, The Power of Now. And I was literally trying to read it, and all the words were moving around. And this was for about the first 3 or 4 days. I was like, I'm so exhausted.
Yeah.
I knew that I'd got to a point with that business where all of the decision making was from more of a place of fear. Whereas when I thought about building the restaurant business and the early days of the food business, it was all bursting out of this space of joy and creativity and this thing that could change the world. And it ended up, because of all these different reasons, down a very different path. And I almost wanted to run an experiment to see if you just really ruthlessly keep yourself in a space of joy, is it possible to build not just a business? Because I think, yes, you could build a lifestyle business, but is it possible to build a really successful, strong, good business by just holding that boundary and holding that space?
And I also do think I'm on a mission to change how we think about lifestyle businesses, because I just think they're epic. I really do.
I agree.
I also think you can build a lifestyle business which has grown to a point where your lifestyle is supported and it's not you doing everything. And I keep coming back to this idea. I really resonate with what you're saying, because I think you're always going to go through highs and lows. I think it's totally unrealistic to pretend to a founder that the things around you won't go high and low. And the people I respect most talk about really keeping this equilibrium, which I find really hard. But the question I do keep coming back to is, hang on a second, is this a pattern which is really unjoyful, that actually is quite miserable, and that, hang on, I have agency over this.
Yeah.
I don't have to keep letting this pattern repeat. And actually, it is going to repeat unless I do something differently or look at the fundamental design of the business, the structure of how we're delivering it. Something has to shift.
Yeah, 100%. Things going high and low, and where you stay, I always visualize, so we see it a lot, don't we, that, the ups and downs of the business, but trending in the right direction. And people will zoom in on the image and they can just see the down bit, but actually when you zoom out, you're on one of a curve. I always think it's our responsibility to get our head around being the trend line. Just recognizing you are on a straight line, but as you say, around you, it's going to go up and down.
The other thing I think about a lot at the moment, or in the last year, is that life is going to life, right? Things go very wrong very quickly with things that you have no control over, right? I think burnout is such a deep and real thing that I never want to step on it too hard, having never faced full burnout. But I think I've experienced baby burnout at the beginning of the year, having helped a friend through deeply tragic time. And when I was helping her, there was nothing else I would do. I wouldn't change a thing about it. I am beyond grateful that my work allows me to step out of it and to do the things that matter to me personally. I think it's one of the most beautiful things. But actually, the time I had to step up to that, or got to step up to that, I hadn't got anything in the tank because of how I've been managing the business. And a big thing for me recently has been thinking, okay, how do I keep something in the tank for when life lives, and I won't make any of those other decisions differently, right? And I don't want to change anything about actually the way I handled that situation. One of the things I'm happiest I was able to do in my life, but how do I have something protected so I don't come out of it going, oh, okay, I maybe just practically a bit more energy than I had to give, I gave. And again, don't regret it. And I think actually as a founder, everything you're giving is for the business. And I remember messaging my wonderful co-founder from the hospital when I was there with this friend and saying, look, I feel like I'm slightly taking the piss because this isn't directly happening to me, but I've very much stepped out of the business to deal with it. I need you to tell me if you're feeling like I'm taking the piss, because no company would be giving me compassionate leave or time off for this. And his point immediately was, we started this business so that we could be there for the life bits that matter. And this is a life bit that matters to you. I promise I'll tell you if it gets too much, but like, I'm really happy you can do this. I'm so sorry you have to do it, or you're in a situation where you're doing it. But like, I'm so happy that this is what we're building. One of the things I think about, having had conversations with you, that I think maybe for some founders who are feeling almost quite far from joy, sometimes it's also about being like, okay, life is not going to go to a point where it doesn't mean you're skipping on rainbows every day, but actually making these like really conscious, and not because I've got it nailed, like I'm still going through periods where I'm like, oh my God, if something happened right now, I would have no energy to expend. But to your point, the trend line is very different.
100%, yeah. And recognizing as well that you can have the joy whilst having the stress and the strain.
Yeah.
Really starting to understand that you can have the two things
exactly
at the same time.
That's true.
So even though I've had this commitment to staying within joy, it doesn't mean that I haven't had
you've suddenly reached self-actualization and never stressed by anything.
Yeah, stress and worry. And I was obviously very sick last year. After I had the brain hemorrhage, we moved within the next 6 months, and my husband was on tour, and there were like all these different things going on. And actually, I realized within that period that there could be all of these really challenging, difficult things going on, but actually still keep that commitment to joy and figuring out, where does it actually come from for you?
That's it.
Because it's different for everybody, right? Everybody talks about balance and routines and all this kind of thing. But I think just taking a minute to think, what do I really love? What really fills me up?
Yeah.
And actually, listing it all out and then looking at the list and going, how much of that is actually in my life? When was the last time I saw that thing, or I was around that thing, or I did that thing? And actually, you can do little micro things of that are constantly topping you up, even as you go through these very challenging journeys.
It's so true. And also, I think for a while after baby burnout, I'd find myself saying constantly to myself, oh, I've got to do this call, I've got to run this workshop, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. I didn't have much to give, so everything felt like, oh God, I have to somehow
Well, the thing is,
myself.
it carries on as well. Like,
this is it.
That carries on, and you go from sitting at the top of the front of the driver's seat to being dragged behind.
100%.
And that's 100%. When you're like, well, I've got to.
And actually, for me, I think if someone had told me this, it would probably feel really trite. So by all means, listeners, roll your eyes now. But I definitely found a reframe. And I once sat and did it one day. I was in such a grumpy mood. And I was like, I'm actually just going to sit and see if I can reframe some of this. Really basic reframes. Like, hang on a second. Well, why am I doing this call? What does this call allow me to do that I love? Okay, and if nothing, why am I doing this call? This probably shouldn't be there. And even if it's boring, what does that allow me to do that I like?
Yeah.
And actually, hang on, I love workshops. I love workshops. Okay, hang on. I get to go. Yeah, I'm tired. But actually, this really energizes me.
Yeah.
And I love working with these kind of people and these kind of ideas. And I do think some of these little reframes also go a long way. It's not just changing, it's changing your mindset around it.
Massively. That one of the simplest ones you can do is just ban the phrase I have to and change it to I get to. I'm always trying to figure out how to transfer these learnings outward, because a lot of what I now really feel in my bones comes from
near-death experience.
having a brain hemorrhage
Yeah.
and getting that close. But that's really, the fact that we get, it's
Yeah.
just such a privilege, and we don't have to get that philosophical about
Yeah.
it and to wake up every day and say, I'm such a privilege for me to breathe and
Yeah.
all that kind of thing. But it is. I reframed everything even through my recovery around, I was in so much pain for so many months in that early stages. But I reframed it as a privilege. I could have not been there and I could have not been feeling that pain. So even the fact that I got to feel the pain was a privilege. So if you can actively work on what it means to reframe and really understand, because it's science, right? It's our neural pathways of our brain and they're firing down one road and we can work on them firing down a different road. And that is what creates our experience of life. So if you can get your head around even the very basics of neuroplasticity
100%.
and you can really ground it in science in that way and then actively work on it on a daily, weekly, whatever you want basis, it really puts you in good stead whilst you're on this journey.
Because it doubles down so hard the other way, right? The negative talk we give ourselves as founders, not just that you have to, but like, oh, I'm messing this up, oh, I'm letting them down, oh, I'm
Absolutely.
dropping plates, I'm dropping balls. Never would I sit and go, oh, I actually delivered that really well, I'm really proud of that. Or, oh, actually, I managed to do this. And okay, neither of them were as good if I was doing it alone, but actually that was a choice. And I'm proud of what I did.
100%.
We're so bad at that.
I was working with a coach at one of my most challenging points through lockdown. And I was obviously talking badly about myself on one of the calls. And she said, I want you today to get off this call and go and sit. I get a bit emotional when I think about this. I get so many people to do this and they're the same. I want you to go and sit in front of a mirror. And I want you to see the person in the mirror, not as you, but as somebody else. And when you think of all the things that person's done and all the mountains they've climbed and everything they're facing. And I want you to talk to them how you would talk to that person as if it's not you. And that's really emotional and really makes you realize how you should be talking to yourself and what you deserve and actually what you've been doing and the complete opposite of that.
I love that. And there's another one I heard recently, which is if you put a little picture of yourself as a kid on your desk, like, would you ever talk to little Thea, little Harriet, as I was when I was a child? Ever? No. And you'd be really mad if someone else did.
Yeah.
Really mad.
Yeah, 100%.
And also the other one I often say when people are getting really stuck is you would never talk to a friend like this. And not even, you wouldn't talk to them. You wouldn't think it. And if they were saying it, you'd be like, hang on, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
And not just because you're being polite, because it's actually true.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. I want to close with, I guess, a couple of tips just on personal branding, right? Because I think you're doing this really good job of, you show up very consistently, I think, which is part of it. But you're also bringing yourself very personally to your posts on LinkedIn about founder journeys, about lessons. Obviously, you and I are big believers that this can be a really powerful way to grow. I don't think it's right for everyone, but I think most people need to try it and see if what's blocking them is maybe some unhelpful thought patterns around it's cringe, people aren't going to like me, those kind of things. I don't think should be the blocker. So if they're the blocker, we can get past those.
Yeah.
But what are your suggestions for someone who's thinking, should I do it more? Oh, I feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
So I think when people feel like it's cringe or they don't know what to say, generally it's because you're looking at what other people are doing and thinking, I need to do that.
Yes. Oh. I'm raising my hands in the studio for anyone who can't see me. Yes. This is because that was me. I agree.
Which is not what makes it powerful. One thing I always get people to do is I say, when you're spending time on your feed, start really pulling out the things that you love and you're attracted to. Not the ones that you think, oh, that's my competitor or whatever, but what's the ones where you're like, oh, yeah, I love that. And if you start to look at those, they're often not doing what everybody else is doing and they're being unapologetically themselves.
100%.
And that's what we're drawn to. We don't need any more carbon copies of an alert or we really just don't, right? We need human connection. And by the way, I hated social media until 2 years ago. You would not have found me online. All through running my businesses, my teams were always like, are you going to post it? Do you need to post? Do you need to post? And I'd be like, yeah, it's always on my list.
Yeah, it didn't get across.
Because I couldn't get my head around this stuff either. But I think one of the things I shifted with starting to really enjoy LinkedIn as a platform is thinking of it as actually being in a room with people. When I spend time on there and I go on there to have conversations, I make myself feel like I'm stepping into the room and I'm with all these people, because it just makes it human. You're not
Yeah.
trying to put forward this very polished, very different version of yourself. That being said, I do think it really helps to go through a process of thinking, why am I here? What am I doing? Who really do I want to draw into my world? Who do I want in my room with me?
Why am I going to spend time in that room?
And then going through a process of thinking, okay, who am I in my whole self? And which bits of that do I need to put forward in this room? Because it is a particular room for a particular purpose. Because we all have all these different multifaceted sides to us, right? I'll dance around in my pajamas at home being ridiculous, but you're not going to see any of that on LinkedIn.
Which breaks my heart, but one day,
You never know.
hang me in the post.
Maybe after this.
I want first eyes on it.
But, you're just picking the little slice of you. So it's still authentic, it's still you, but it's for that purpose. And then you protect all the rest of it. I learned a lot of what I do online now from Lara Costa, who's amazing on LinkedIn and just a super babe. And she talks about you're becoming a character. Who's the character of Thea or of whoever you are on that platform? And then it doesn't feel as exposed. It doesn't feel like your whole self and your whole life is on this platform.
And I also tell founders this a lot. We all share and laugh at sorry if you made these posts, but the post that's, I got married and here's what it taught me about B2B sales. It's become a bit of a meme. And I often tell founders, you will not find me sharing lots about my partner on social media because he hates social media. And so actually that doesn't feel right.
And also, how does it benefit your audience?
Exactly.
Right. I think if you were running a business that was to do with relationships, maybe you would
feels a little bit different. Yeah, 100%.
But for me, it's about the community that I want to build, the room that I want to build is mainly founders, a lot of solo founders who are more introverted, don't have huge networks. And I know for them to really get to know me and trust me and want to be in that room, I need to show vulnerability, and I really need to be open about my story and my shortcomings as much as my successes and all of it. That's why I'm the way I am on social media. If I had a different goal, if I had a different mission, I might not be the way I am.
But I also think it's like keeping that authenticity so that it doesn't feel like, because to your point, I think what I often think about is like there are lots of facets to us as characters, and you're right in the sense that you do definitely choose like which ones are most appropriate but also most relatable, in the same way that, exactly to your analogy, in a room I'm not every version of Hattie, right? If you meet me in a workshop, you'll get one version who is totally me, but also not the version that's making ridiculous dance moves with friends and singing out of tune in my car when no one can hear me, and all those things are also real Hattie. It's just you don't have to show every facet. And I think people get torn between the sense of I have to expose everything about myself to be authentic. I don't think that's what authenticity is. The room really helps with that, because like you will never be every version of yourself in one moment ever.
Yeah, 100%. I always get people to list every characteristic that you would describe yourself as or others would describe you as, like everything about you. Just list it all out. You might come up with a list of 15, 20 things. Then think about who is it you're talking to. And with that in mind, circle all the characteristics that person really needs to see pop out. Because actually, if you come on with all 15 to 20 of them, people just get confused and they don't really know who you are or whether they should latch onto you or not.
And it's so true, because no part of me is expecting my clients to think of the same characteristics my boyfriend would think of when describing me, right? That would be weird. So, okay, two final very quick fire questions. One is, what is the piece of advice that you have received that has been the most valuable to you?
I don't know if I could call it advice because it was more through a book, but it was to focus on your own energy, and the energy around you will sort itself out. So effectively just really focusing on what you want to put out, the way you would want to be treated, the way you want the world to be, and not worry about what's going on around you, because it will eventually align. That changed my life.
Love that. That is a good one. And I love these because I end up being like, great, I just got the best piece of advice you got. I got it now. Okay, final question. What is the thing that you're proudest of?
Over the last 2 years, coming through everything that I've come through, and launching another business, but in a very different way, and just persevering and keeping going and recreating my world around something that's really right. I feel like it's definitely still not even the end of my entrepreneurial journey, but it's the next evolution. And it would have been really easy for me over the last couple of years to just go back to very well paid corporate roles that were coming into me. And I chose a harder path, and I can see already how much that's benefiting me.
Love it. Well, gorgeous note to end on. Thea, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Before you go, please do take a minute to follow so you never miss another episode. We have some incredible founders coming up. And I always love to hear what resonates with listeners. So do drop us a direct message on Instagram @NotMyFirstGuest with any moments that meant something to you, ideas for future episodes, or your own entrepreneurial stories you want to share. Until next time, happy startupping.